This podcast contains information and details relating to suicide. We urge anyone struggling with their emotions to contact Lifeline on 13 11 14, 13 11 14, or visit them at lifeline.org.au. A 24-year-old devoted mother of two, fleeing a violent relationship.
Says my mum, I will see you soon.
Bags packed. Car running. Her daughters strapped into the back seat.
Mum told me that she needed to go back inside to grab something.
Panic.
Amy's dead, sir. Like, Amy's dead, eh?
Confusion.
Well, about 5 minutes, they said, no, it's a suicide.
100% this is a murder scene.
What do you think is really the honest truth about Amy?
The truth about Amy.
Until we meet
Episode 18.
Hi, I'm Liam Bartlett.
And I'm Alison Sandy. Hello, Nancy. Oh, you're looking so beautiful. I'm filming already, I'm sorry, but you know, it's a hungry beast, Nancy. It's good. On my recent visit to Perth, I had the pleasure of catching up with Amy's mum and best friend, Nancy Kirk and Erin Gower. Oh, so how are you guys feeling after everything, this whole avalanche of publicity and you know, that spotlight, I suppose, and the podcast and everything on top of it?
Well, I had a lady come up to me the other week at work. I was helping her, and then she's gone to the counter, bought her stuff, and the woman I was working with said my name, yelled out, "Nancy, can you just have a look at the price for this?" I said, "Yeah, no worries." And as she was walking out, she said, "Oh, you're related to Amy Wensley." I said, "Yeah, I'm her mother." And I don't know what it was just, must have been having one of them days. And I couldn't help it, I just started tearing up. And she said, "Yeah, 100% behind us, you know. Amy didn't do it." And yeah, it was nice. Yeah. It was nice, but I sort of, yeah, and I just teared up and was like, oh my God.
Well, it's a lot, Nancy. I mean, and I don't want to dwell on that because I know how it makes you feel, but yeah, I completely understand. There is nothing worse than what you've been through. Like for me, you know, we as mums, we're all mums, right? Nothing worse than losing a child. So, and then having to fight for justice.
I think that's the hardest. I was talking to Tay yesterday and I told her I was coming to meet you and you're going to be here. And she goes, "Oh." I said, "Why did you want to come?" She goes, "No thanks." It's like, okay. She goes, "Oh, I wish you would just hurry up and finish."
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah, I know." She goes, "I hate seeing you like this every time something comes up because it messes with your head, Nan." She goes, "I don't like it." I said, "Yeah." And just felt so nice.
Yeah. And that's, I think, the sad thing. And they talk about it being dredged up again as though, we can help that, you know, if it was dealt with properly in the first place.
That's right, we wouldn't be doing all this and reliving it every single time.
One of the things that came up, Liam, is how victims and their families are treated after the investigation of a loved one has been botched, compared to that of witnesses and persons of interest.
I don't understand how Erin, Tash, myself, what we've seen, what we've heard out of Amy's mouth, then you look at David, Gareth, and what's the other one? Josh. Them three. Their stories aren't consistent at all. I can't remember. I forgot. Where we can tell you exactly what we said at the coroner's court, nearly, how long ago? 2021. I can remember that phone call. I can't get that out of my head, her voice. I'm not going to forget that. I can't remember bits and pieces.
Shock. When you were in shock, right?
When I got to the house,
Yeah.
after David said that to me, I can remember bits and pieces. I can remember bits and pieces when I got home. But that phone call, what she said to me, I'll never forget.
One of the frustrating things about it is that we're constantly thinking about what information can we get out there about people, like where's David at now in his life, or what's he doing, when does he have court, and all these things, and we don't really get to just focus on just thinking about Amy and how she was as a person and who she was and all that sort of stuff, and just enjoying or remembering her life. We're just focusing on this bad, part of it.
Like I can't even enjoy being a grandmother to Shania and Talia. And that's what I miss. I miss those phone calls. And I miss that. I don't feel like a grandmother to them girls. Yeah. And just shouldn't have to.
And how the system isn't just geared against them, but also the people who try to help them. I then tell Nancy and Erin about former Detective Anne Lehane, who we discussed in episode 16, and how she was reprimanded for not falling in behind the decision from Major Crime that Amy suicided.
But why is she getting reprimanded when the two detectives still had their friggin' jobs?
How do they have the authority to tell her to do that?
Well, they don't, but she got reprimanded and then she was seen as not being a team player.
Oh my God. But aren't the uniformed police officers their colleagues as well?
They're not detectives.
No, different issue.
And they do friggin' better job. It's costing the government more now, looking into Amy's case now,
Yeah.
than what it would have if they done their job properly that night. I just hope this new cold case team are a lot thorough and a lot better than the last ones. God, I hope they do the right thing this time by Amy, by Amy's daughters.
They say it themselves now. It's advertised as a homicide, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's
So?
a homicide investigation.
Yeah.
The
No.
question is now whether they say they've got enough information or enough evidence to prosecute. I mean, what do you think of that?
Yeah. It's a no-brainer. They definitely do. If it wasn't suicide,
He grabbed Amy by the throat. He threw her on the ground. That came out of Amy's mouth to me. That's when I told Amy, pack your stuff. You and the girls get down here now. And then that happened. She was hysterical. She couldn't hardly talk properly.
Yeah.
She was that hysterical. But I got her to calm down and, yes, Mum, I'll be there soon.
yeah. And all the evidence shows that she was a attentive mum. She wasn't just like a young mum that just doesn't really worry about their kids and just lets them go.
She would follow the school bus to the school when they first started catching a bus to school. She would follow the bus to school to make sure they got off the bus and walked in to the school.
Yeah.
And she would follow the bus after school. She'd done that for about a week to make sure her girls were safe on the bus.
I don't know about you, Liam, but what bothers me the most is how little power victims and their families have in the event authorities decide it's all just too hard. As mentioned by the New South Wales Crime Commissioner, Michael Barnes, last season, if the DPP doesn't decide to prosecute, there's no review process.
Yeah, it's an all or nothing situation, isn't it, Al? It's very final. And the families of victims must really feel that, I think. You'd have to do the old walk a mile in my shoe routine
to fully understand how they must feel. But it's almost, how can I put it? It's almost a godlike sort of system, isn't it, in that respect? Because that's it. The final word is the final word, but the final word comes very early, I think, in the process. Like there's no checks and balances. You just have to rely on the system. Like you're in the hands of the system, full stop, and you just have to trust that everyone along the line, and it's a very short line, has done their job properly, due diligence, and with enough verve and vigour to come to the right decision. And I say that because, everyone's under pressure. Like there's budgetary pressures, there's resource pressures. Everyone in those offices is under a lot of pressure because they do a lot of very good work. And we're the first to acknowledge that. But that's it. That's the sort of the office of the high and mighty. Now, just to provide our listeners on the podcast with context, I've gone back and had a look at the WA Director of Public Prosecutions Act 1991. And his role, the DPP's role, is very expansive. It includes commencing or conducting, quote, the prosecution of any offence, whether indictable or not. Now, I won't go into all these functions. I'll bore you to death, but I thought I'd mention a few key ones that's relevant to the case of Amy Wensley. For example, under the Coroners Act of 1996, they are required to participate in inquests and, with concurrence of the coroner, assist them in the proceedings. Talk more about that in a minute because that'll become a very important point when we go to the previous coroner who had carriage of Amy's case originally. But the DPP's office also have the ability to, quote, make a request in writing to an official, including the Commissioner of Police. Now, that's a direct quote from the Act. I haven't added the last part. The last part reads, and a member of the police force whose functions include prosecuting for or investigating offences. Now, you'll remember the statement from the Office of the DPP said they had but a mere ability to advise an investigative agency, implying WA Police. And it was their decision, WA Police's decision, whether to lay charges or not. However, I think they're being a bit humble here, for want of a better description, because clearly the director's power from the Act, from that quote that I've just given you, extends to requesting from the Police Commissioner, with the obvious expectation that he would comply, for any specified information or documentation or material that may be relevant, that the DPP thinks may be relevant, if considered to bring or take over a prosecution in relation to an offence or suspected offence. Now, he can also request investigation or further investigation be carried out into any matter in relation to that offence or suspected offence. Again, the Police Commissioner must comply unless there is any other law preventing that compliance, which I would suggest to you again would be very unusual. So Rob Owen, SC, who is the Director of Public Prosecutions in WA, really can make the difference. I mean, he has complete power to make the difference as to whether Amy's case is brought to justice.
Yeah, it's interesting, again, going back to that whole thing of them not having any review process for his decisions. I mean, not even a judge gets that. The power that role has, the DPP has, is just... I can't quite fathom why they're allowed that level of power, given that people who you would say were more experienced, had better credentials in those top areas in Supreme Court and High Court aren't given that ability. I mean, well, the High Court is, but certainly not the Supreme Court. And it's quite surprising.
Oh, you're right. I mean, Supreme Court judges are questioned all the time, aren't they? That's why they go to an appeals court. And then, as you say, ultimately there's the High Court. So the appeal court judges sitting on that bench, they also get scrutinised. The other interesting part about that is, Al, is that you've got to remember that in the DPP's office, the DPP is not looking just at things that are obvious to you or me or investigating officers, information that we don't even know about. There's other variables as well. There's political variables involved. in deciding whether or not a brief meets those criteria to, send it through to charges. They're clearly, I mean, there are, and we've had this from a number of DPPs across the country over the years. We've had comments that, very truthful comments about the nature of the budget, for example, and the fact that, that particular case hasn't got a great chance of a prosecution being successful. Therefore, they must spend their money where, justice is also seen to be done. So there are nefarious variables involved that we may not necessarily know about or understand or have explained to us. So there's lots of things in the shadows. So it makes that lack of appeals process, I think, even more acute.
Yeah. Yeah, anyway, I know that Michael Barnes would really like a national campaign on this, because obviously it affects all states, not just WA. But
certainly.
Yeah, anyway. It's interesting, that part about the DPP's role in inquests as well, Liam. That came up in a recent interview.
Yeah, we managed to track down the very first coroner who handled Amy's case. And I must say, her views were very enlightening, and she was very forthcoming, I thought. I'll let our listeners be the judge, pardon the pun. But even though she's now retired, Evelyn Vicker was a very experienced, accomplished, extremely knowledgeable coroner who, like Sarah Linton, who was the coroner presiding over the eventual inquest, held the same title, Deputy State Coroner. And what I found most interesting is that Evelyn had a specific background in forensics, which I think provided her with a bit more understanding of their importance, especially in relation to this case. Anyway, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Here we are getting acquainted.
Evelyn, thank you very much for your time. It's really kind of you to have a chat to us. So let's go back in time a little bit. How long were you a Deputy State Coroner?
From sort of about July 2000 through to June 2019.
That's a fair old stint.
Yep.
And what sort of cases were you exposed to during all that time?
Well, there was only the state coroner, which then was Alistair Hope and myself for a period of that time up until 2013, I think. So, I mean, between us, we were exposed to all the coronial cases, because between the two of us, we had to cover everything. Every sudden and unexpected death had to have an investigation as opposed to an inquest. So there would be an investigation and one or other of us would sign off on it. So we saw accidents, homicide. Well, not usually homicides was after a trial. So we would get it afterwards just to do the finding, because of course we're only responsible for manner and cause of death, nothing more. So accidents, suicide, medical negligence, workplace incidents, anything where there was a death that was sudden and unexpected, even natural causes, if the person was not expected to die, therefore a doctor wasn't prepared to do a death certificate, then that would become a coronial case.
So essentially your brief was always trying to find the manner and cause of death.
Well, cause of death was up to the pathologists, if you like, but then we would put the cause of death together with the surrounding evidence to give a manner of death, i.e. suicide, accident, unlawful killing, those sorts of things, yes.
Whatever was relatable to
the evidence about the circumstances.
The person end up being deceased one way or the other.
Yes, yes.
Was your background as a prosecutor helpful in doing that sort of coronial work?
Yes, it was, but don't forget, prosecutor is beyond a reasonable doubt. Coronial is only on the balance of probabilities, because you're fact-finding, prosecuting your fault-finding, coronial, you're only fact-finding, okay? So there's kind of a difference there. But honestly, my background as a biologist was much more pertinent and helpful to me as a prosecutor and as a coroner. Having that biology, physiology understanding made it a lot easier for me to understand expert evidence around whatever it was, biological or whatever it was. I really think my background as a biologist was the most useful to me, both in criminal law which I was doing, and as a coroner.
So that part of it, the science part of it, helped enormously.
Yep, hugely, absolutely hugely.
But also, I would imagine, as a prosecutor, you learned along the way how to talk to people and, more importantly, how to decipher their responses in such a way where you suspected or perhaps concluded that they were either telling the truth or leading you down another garden path.
That's the forensic part, as in somebody may say something, and taking it from a prosecution point of view, someone can be mistaken, but because they totally believe what they're saying, they're very credible. So they're totally credible. So they are telling the truth, okay? But they may not be reliable, and it's other evidence that will point to that. So it's not that they're intentionally misleading you, but they may have a particular memory that serves them one way. So being able to tell if someone's telling the truth or not isn't actually what you're after. It's actually whether or not what they believe are the facts. Do you understand what I mean by that?
Yes, but yeah. I guess that's my point, really. Maybe I phrased that the wrong way.
Yeah.
Being able to read that
people,
scenario and situation.
But you have to have other evidence to be able to do that. So, I mean, but someone who believes they're telling the truth, even if they're mistaken, is so credible because they are telling the truth as they know it. So this thing about truth or not truth, no, not really. It's just, you just know a person passionately believes what they're saying, but it may not be quite right.
So again, this is a really good point Ms. Vicker is making. We've both spoken to Gareth Price, and he genuinely seems to believe what he's saying.
And again, this is justification of why a trial would be so critical in a case like Amy's. But given Evelyn's background, she is perfectly placed to provide reasonable opinion, as I point out here.
Clearly, you look at the world forensically anyway.
Yes, I mean, I think you have to. I mean, I think that's what science probably teaches you, but kind of so does the law, I guess, in the criminal law area.
It's long been argued, especially in Western Australia, that the coroner's office has been understaffed, under-resourced. I mean, did you find that the backlog of cases was a constant challenge?
Yes, it was, in a sort of way. But it's very difficult for families to understand everything that goes into making a determination. Sometimes we wouldn't get the pathologist's report for 18 months or so, which would delay the police report. And it's not that anyone wasn't working hard. They were working very hard. It's just that some of those things take an awfully long time to clarify, like especially neuropathology about if you're looking at medical issues. Sometimes we just don't have the information in Australia, and our pathologists would be looking to other countries, to Great Britain, to put information in. And then when DNA became so important, originally we weren't as expert in that as we may be now. And also the other thing that people really have to understand, and it's difficult for me because I'm not a technical person, that's kind of different from the biology side, things have come such a long way with communication. It's very easy these days to ask someone's opinion in the States or someone's opinion in Britain if you can provide them with all the information. But it wasn't always that easy. It used to be you'd have to send them stuff and get it back, and then they'd have another query, whereas now that can be done quite quickly. But there goes your backlog, if you like. We're waiting for information a lot of the time.
Very frustrating for the families, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I totally accept that. But if you want it done, and that's the other thing, if you want it done properly, then, I guess it's just very hard to explain to people.
You obviously relished the challenge, though, as part of that work. Well, why did you?
I loved what I was doing, yes.
Well, so why did you finish up?
Well, I'd reached that. Now, that's part of the whole coronial thing. At the time I was made a coroner, I had to be a magistrate, okay? A magistrate is a statutory appointment, and at the time I was made a magistrate, the statutory retirement age was 65. That was it, okay?
Okay.
Shortly after I hit 65, it was extended to 70, but I'd already had to officially retire by that stage. So it was possible to get extensions, but you had to apply for it every year to the governor. And that actually is quite tiresome. It's quite hindering. So I actually hit 65. So I then applied for an extension, and it was just becoming difficult because of the statutory retirement age. As I say, it then changed, but that didn't save me. So magistrates, and also as the coronial system, you got a coronial warrant for either 3 years or for 5 years. Generally, it was just renewed. Now, unfortunately, and I mean, I think it's a very bad move, coroners don't have to be magistrates, which means they're very vulnerable. So if they do something that is not appreciated, they may not get their warrant renewed. That sort of applied before, but because you were a magistrate, you still always had a job to go to. You could go to being an ordinary magistrate. Now, if a coroner blots their copybook in some way, then they're out on the street, if you like. They don't have that, which makes them vulnerable politically, is all I can really say to that.
What Evelyn Vicker appears to be saying here is there's a lot of political pressure put on coroners, and if they step out of line, they may lose their jobs. Makes it hard to be independent.
The state coroner is a statutory appointment to a particular, they can do that until they hit now the retirement age of 70. But because the newer coroners are not magistrates, they're quite vulnerable to their tenure.
Fair to say you got caught up by the red tape of the day.
Yes, I think you can say that.
Great shame, because good coroners don't come along very often.
Well, I can't answer that. I did what I did to the best of my ability. Some people wouldn't approve of that, and others would. I don't know. I certainly strived to always be true to what I believed to be right. And I did that as a prosecutor too.
Here Liam asks Evelyn if she remembers what she thought when she first saw the file of Amy Wensley.
Can you recall with any sort of clarity your first impressions?
Oh yeah, very clearly. I can't remember why I asked to see the file, because that was after 2013 when we'd expanded as an office, and there were then 4 of us. There was a new state coroner, and I can't remember. And I don't know why that file was brought to my attention, but I did read it, and my whole forensic background, to me, it was a homicide. No, that's not even fair. It was an unlawful killing. It was an unlawful killing. But the difference between a prosecutor and a coroner is that all I'm saying is manner of death. To me, it was an unlawful killing. I couldn't see it as a suicide. I couldn't see it as an accident.
Straight away?
Absolutely. I mean, I think forensically the photograph speaks for itself, but the difficulty we had was that the photograph was only macro blood splatter. It's not micro, which is what you need for a true determination. But even with what we had, to me, it was inexplicable any other way. That is not the situation for some of the other coroners. As you know, 2 coroners had conduct of it after me, and they didn't see it the same way. And particularly Coroner Linton, she heard the evidence, she sat through the court. You make a determination, you said, on where you think's are. You're the trier of fact.
Yeah.
And
I'll come back to that.
Yeah, but she didn't, it was just different. But to me, I looked at the photograph and I wanted more information.
The red flag went up straight away.
Yes.
So is that why you then referred the case in order to get a report from Professor Tim Ackland? Is that why you sought him out?
Well, it didn't happen quite like that. I asked the police for more information. And I can't remember how that went. And at some stage, I understood that Professor Ackland had been asked to look at it. And so I got counsel assisting, because eventually I decided if we weren't going to get any more information, I'd have to inquest it. So before we did the inquest, I asked the person who was counsel assisting to contact Professor Ackland to ask him exactly what he had had. And he hadn't had very much. So I asked if he thought he would be able to do more with more information. So I gave him more information that was on the brief. And just before the inquest was due to go, we got his report. And as a result of his report, I thought it was highly likely that she hadn't pulled the trigger herself. And as a result, I pulled the inquest because there's a provision in the Coroner's Act that says that if criminal proceedings are in the offing, then you can't proceed. And on what we had, I knew you couldn't charge anybody. We didn't have any information that would indicate who it might be. It was just the fact that she didn't pull the trigger herself. So I pulled it, sent it to the DPP, because that's what the Act required me to do, hoping that if it was from the DPP, the police may have different investigative pathways for them that were not part of what I needed to be doing.
So let me ask you about that. When you were looking at it, firstly, at that time, the police had already formally investigated it at least twice on 2 separate occasions, arguably 3, but I'm giving one of the operations.
It was only twice by the time I sent it to the DPP, the original, and then when I sent it back to them.
The cold case.
Before we got the... No, the cold case came after that.
After. I was thinking about Operation Ingenuity.
You see, I left being a coroner or deputy state coroner in June 2019. The inquest had been set for August 2018, I think.
Yeah.
So I then lost conduct of the file.
What I'm trying to get at is so the police first turn up to Amy's house, and we have the whole charade of the detectives turning up and ruling a suicide straight away.
I didn't use that term, but yeah, okay.
And then they write it off essentially as a suicide. But then before 2018, then it goes back to homicide over the next few days to a week. It goes back to homicide.
That's right. Yes. Yes.
So that's what I'm counting.
We didn't go back to homicide. It went to homicide. The first detectives were local detectives.
Yes, correct.
And
correct. That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
So, okay. So, okay.
So at the time
That's
those first 2 detectives saw it, all they saw was the evidence that I had, which was one of the constables had taken photographs on his mobile. They actually saw the body, but they only had macro, no micro, and they decided on that it was a suicide.
On that basis, yes. But that was the same photos that you saw.
Yep.
And you had the red flags go up.
Yep, but I understood forensic evidence, don't forget. I mean, when we first started prosecuting...
Well, they are detectives.
Well, they are, maybe. But when we first started prosecuting, you'd be amazed at the number of times the investigating officer would come in and I would say about a case, and it wasn't necessarily a murder, it could be even burglaries. I'd say, what does the forensic evidence tell you? And they looked at me as... and I was one of the first prosecutors at that time for minor cases to call the forensic people in and talk to them about their evidence. But back when I started, a lot of the detectives didn't understand the value of forensic evidence, especially if it's negative. They couldn't see that negative forensic evidence was still evidence. I understood that because of my background.
Evelyn also mentioned doing a search of the National Coronial Investigation System. And in 2014, she couldn't find any death by suicide like this. By this, I mean with the car running, kids strapped in the back seat, bags packed, then go back inside to get something and decide, no, instead of dropping her kids off to her mum's first, she's going to go ahead and shoot herself in the head from a really awkward angle. It's why it would be an oversight if WA police haven't consulted a suicidologist.
So the police are saying, no, we think it's a suicide. So you look at the file with that, I take it, you correct me if I'm wrong, with that notation sort of attached to it. The police
I didn't agree.
And you didn't agree?
No.
So you pulled it from Inquest.
No, that was a bit later on. I asked them to look at other things before the Inquest thing. I got to put it down for Inquest because I wasn't going to get any further on the evidence we had. And again, the difficulty we had is that there was no micro. There was no micro blood spatter analysis.
So you look for more information.
Yep.
Hence, enter Professor Tim Ackland.
Yes, because we weren't going to get micro because it had been destroyed. because it got the scene was forensically cleaned. If some of the blood spatter experts had seen it, had been able to do micro forensics on the blood spatter, which tells you a lot more about direction and those sorts of things. Now, to compensate for the fact we didn't have that, I had to go to someone like Professor Ackland.
And when Professor Ackland comes back with his conclusion, which was very strong, that Amy did not shoot herself, that somehow, somewhere, there must have been a third party involved, is that when you sent the case to the DPP?
Well, first of all, I pulled the inquest and alerted the police to the fact I was going to do that, because they'd been organising witnesses and things like that. So I pulled the inquest, and then I sent it to the DPP, because on Professor Ackland's report, I was probably looking at an indictable offence. Whether or not we had a suspect was irrelevant. It was if she didn't pull the trigger herself, it may be an indictable offence. If it wasn't an accident, then that meant it was up to the DPP to look at it.
And when you sent it to the DPP and then told the police that you'd pulled the inquest, was there any reaction from the police?
No, because I had to explain to the commander why I'd done it. He came in and spoke to me, and I honestly cannot remember who it was. And he immediately, I showed him the report. So before I did it officially, I showed him the report, and he was very good. He understood straight away what was going on. But before that, I'd had discussions with various police officers as to why I didn't believe it was a suicide. I mean, I can remember at one stage getting down behind the door of my office and saying, it's just not, in my view, physically possible. I got asked, have you ever handled a shotgun? Well, it just so happened, yes, I had handled a side-by-side shotgun, and I was even more determined that, but, the Professor Ackland wasn't 100%, but expert witnesses never are. Well, most of them never are. I know we have some people who are prepared to go 100%, but real experts in a criminal trial will never 100% say one thing. There's always that. Professor Ackland may be prepared to now, but that's not what his report said.
No.
He just said highly consistent or highly inconsistent.
You're 100% right.
Yeah.
Just to clarify here, I'd interviewed Professor Ackland the day before I interviewed Evelyn Vicker. So I was able to tell Evelyn the exact percentage that Professor Ackland attributed to that.
95%.
Yeah, because that's the whole basis of scientific theory, is the fact that a theory is proven until another theory proves it wrong.
You'd be happy to back any theory at 95%, wouldn't you? That's what he's putting it at.
Well, I personally would, but to a person who hasn't got that sort of background, maybe not. Maybe they expect the all-expensive expert to say 100%. And you have someone who said that, I think. So,
If we went to the races,
well,
and people told us every horse we backed was a 95% chance.
I don't go to the races.
Evelyn remained very circumspect, although she recognised the weight of Professor Ackland's evidence.
When I sent it to the DPP?
When you sent it to the DPP?
I knew as a prosecutor, on what we had at that stage, you didn't have enough evidence to charge a particular person.
In which case you weren't surprised with the way it was treated at the DPP's office.
But I did hope, and that was one of the reasons I got the commander in first before I officially pulled it, I did hope that having pulled it so close to the inquest, that there may be other investigations the police would undertake. And I don't know whether they did or not. I will never know that, and I don't want to know that. But I thought that something, because it was now with the DPP, they might look at other avenues.
Did it ever strike you as strange or surprising that the police generally held that view and didn't budge from it, the suicide scenario?
I guess so, yes. But, hey, 2 coroners after me were also sceptical about what had happened. So, I can't comment on that other than to say...
well, the final coroner, just to put the lid on that, was sceptical but also suspicious because she delivered an open finding.
She did deliver an open finding, but she didn't refer it to the DPP.
Stopping here, Liam, Evelyn makes a good point. Why didn't Sarah Linton refer it to the DPP? Well, I decided to follow up with her, and she pointed out there is a section in the WA Coroners Act which stipulates that where a coroner believes an indictable offence has been committed, it should be referred to the DPP, which is what she did. Coroner Linton was unsure as to what had occurred, so there was no requirement for her to refer it to the DPP.
But this looking for additional information, doesn't that only come about by further investigation? And isn't that largely driven by the police component of all this in this case? Or direction from the DPP's office, which according to one of the sections is possible?
Yep.
So is it about...
There was nothing I could do, though.
No.
As a coroner.
That's right. You were one out and one back.
Yep.
But the intent, I guess, is what I'm asking you about in terms of your opinion, professional opinion.
Yes, the intent of what?
Was there a lack of intent to make those things happen, to do that extra investigation, to go that extra yard?
Certainly every time I asked them to do something, they did it. I'm just trying to think of an example of that, but I can't at the moment. They certainly... there was the whole thing, the original review, before I'd sent it anywhere and before I'd seen anything, it was put to me, originally when I got the file, I was told there was no gunpowder residue, okay? Well, I didn't believe that, so I rang up the pathologists, and I don't think I did, I think probably counsel assisting did. And, when there's a firearm involved, there's always that testing. And then I found out that it had been done. So when I asked for the results of that, it came back to me, but it also came back with an article about how unreliable gunpowder residue can be in an environment where it's been used. But once we'd done that, then I can remember a police officer saying to me, well, how do you account for the burns on her left hand? And I said, that's just as consistent with her trying to push the barrel away from herself as it is with her holding the barrel in place. I said, so there's different interpretations of everything, but I don't have to follow that. Neither did I. And the sending me the article about how unreliable gunshot residue can be was certainly information I needed to know about. And I didn't know about that before, because back in the day, gunpowder residue was anything and everything. And now it's been qualified is the best way to put it. And yeah, I certainly needed to know that as an option. Yep. I'm not saying they were trying to dissuade me, but they were making me aware of everything that they had to work with. Look, I do know that there were differences of opinion within the police. I would be dumb if I didn't think, well, it was apparent on the brief from the attending police officers to the detectives that there was a disagreement about what the evidence said. And the situation at that time was that detectives had the lead on it. So yeah, there were differences of opinion.
Well, let me ask you this. So the open finding.
Yes.
That was made at the inquest. What sort of impact does that finding have on potential criminal proceedings?
It leaves it open for there to be criminal proceedings, which I would have thought is what people wanted. It was better than saying it was suicide, but even then with additional information I don't think that a coroner's finding because a coroner's finding can't be used as evidence in a trial. So the coroner's finding may leave it open for cold cases, which this one has, and I think it's now being treated as a cold case because there's always the potential that new evidence may become available, and we're seeing all the time technology changing. They used to do it through just pure DNA. Now they're using DNA with genealogy to pick people. So who knows what could happen in the future. But any coronial finding can be, for instance, I've done missing persons where we had no information at all that the person was dead and the coroner's making a finding that the person is deceased. Then sometimes after we've done that, a number of years afterwards, a bone may wash up on the shore. And through DNA, we find out that he belongs to that person. So yes, that we've now got proof that the person is dead, and it's probably no longer a missing person because we've got bits of a body. So that can be added to. It's not a final determination. It's a final determination for people to work with. But if more information becomes available, it's not the end of the story.
So in order for the story to progress, it's really in the lap of the police, isn't it? In terms of the work that they do or that they're doing behind the scenes.
Yes.
In order to strengthen that brief before it goes back to the DPP.
Yes.
We've now got 3 independent expert witnesses, including Professor Ackland, who all say adamantly that Amy did not shoot herself.
Yep, I'd agree with that. I've always believed that. That's my belief.
I'm wondering how many more expert witnesses they need.
I don't think they need any more. I was surprised we had any more after Professor Ackland. However, other people didn't agree with me. So they got another expert who backed up Professor Ackland. And then I think you guys got another expert who was prepared to go even further. So, yeah, fine. But there's a huge difference between an unlawful killing or a murder and someone who pulled the trigger. What we've got is evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, I believe, though other people don't agree with that. But to me, we've got evidence beyond a reasonable doubt she didn't pull the trigger herself. Some people don't agree with that, but that was probably enough for me. But that doesn't tell me who did pull the trigger, which is what you need for a criminal trial.
Evelyn, one last thing. If I can just get you to cast your mind back as much as you can, your memory of seeing that case file, talking to people, dealing with people like Professor Ackland, is there a particular part of Amy's case that troubled you more than others?
Yes, both psychologically and forensically, to me, Amy wouldn't have committed suicide at that point in time.
Why do you say that?
Because of that psychologically I'm not supposed to take into account, but the children in the car, talking to her mother, I now know, though I didn't know at the time, but I know, but again, I've not examined this forensically, the passport in the bag. All of those things to me say psychologically, this mum was not looking to leave her children. Okay, so that's the psychological part, which probably doesn't apply in a prosecution, but as a coroner, it makes some impression on me. Okay, the other thing is forensically, to me, it didn't make sense. On all the alternatives that were put to me, and I'm a lot stockier than Amy was. Amy's probably a lot lighter than I am, and she worked out, and she was used to guns. That's the other thing. You know, people tend to use a method for suicide that they're familiar with, which is why a lot of women don't use guns in suicide, and I've never heard of anyone committing suicide by physically holding a shotgun parallel to their temple. I'm not saying it's not done, but I haven't heard of that. But Amy was used to guns, so use of a gun isn't that peculiar. But just the way she was behind the door with her hand underneath her bottom, and different things happen as people relax after they die. So you've got all that forensic input as well. But to me, it was just, I couldn't see how she could pull the trigger herself.
So it was the totality of the scene and all the events surrounding it.
Yep.
That just made you think this is just not how it happened.
Yes.
So what did you think of what Evelyn Vicker had to say, Liam?
I thought she was very candid. I thought she was professionally very respectful to
her colleagues.
Wasn't she? Even though she's retired, she's now retired, as we said at the start of that. She's a bit of a brain box. Sharp as a packet of razors, but she still didn't hold back. But she was gracious to some of the people still involved in proceedings, and that's fair enough. But I think she said what she had to say, and she got a couple of things off her chest. But they all point back to exactly what we've been talking about on this podcast. For now, this is episode 18 now. I mean, Every single thing that's been said from the start by people who've got a few brains and a few clues, all the professional independent experts, all the people we've spoken to who've got credibility in the game, whether it's the legal game or, every single person. I mean, and she was the first one on the scene from the coronial aspect, right?
Yeah.
And she knew. She is completely confident. Amy Wensley did not kill herself. And I thought the comments that she made, not just about the forensics, although she had plenty to say about that and all the sort of scientific aspect of it, but from the attitudinal part of it, from a young mum's perspective.
And I think the other thing is the lens. It's so the importance of the lens that people view these cases through, right? Now, that was 10 years ago, and the world has changed a lot, as you know, in 10 years, with the Me Too movement, and also in relation to domestic violence. People, gaslighting wasn't even a thing back then. But she wasn't looking at it from any of those, I guess, what you'd call emotional perspectives. She was just looking at it from a factual perspective, as was Tim Ackland, right? There was nothing else involved. The same with Larry Blanford. You'd say the same thing, right? He was just like, you just couldn't actually physically do that, and...
Oh, no. In fact, loud and clear, just to reinforce your opinion there, I think that's spot on. If anything, Evelyn comes across a little bit cold and calculating. That's how much she leaves out the emotional component. She only wants to deal with the facts.
Which is what I always thought was I guess the biggest factor, that was the most weighty factor, which is again what Tim Ackland said too, right? I mean, he was, he made it very clear that he had never had a case like this one, which hadn't proceeded to a trial. Just kind of like, well, why did you bother getting him and everyone else thereafter if you weren't going to give weight to it?
Yeah, so nobody's ever questioned Tim Ackland's integrity, right?
No.
Nor Evelyn Vicker, for that matter. If Tim Ackland is turning around saying this is the only case with this sort of weight of evidence that's never gone to trial, why is that? What's extraordinary about this case compared to all the other cases that Tim Ackland's worked on? So it comes back to the police pushback against Evelyn Vicker, for example. So there you've got an incredibly experienced deputy state coroner looking at this case going, guys, this doesn't add up. This is all wrong. The look on this is wrong. The feel on this is wrong. I'm telling you, it's wrong. And yet she is still at that stage coming up against senior police who are insisting, as far as we're concerned, it's a suicide.
The other interesting thing, and I know Evelyn didn't make anything of this, but I thought it was interesting when she said that she asked about the gun residue, right? Why there wasn't any gun residue on the hand that she would have had to have held the gun. And the police came back with a report saying how unreliable gun residue is. And she sort of just said, oh, well, they have to let me know and things like that. But I do think it's interesting that they would have come back with an excuse, I suppose, for that as to why, they could just explain that away. But they couldn't explain this away, right? So I guess my point is it was always a case, which of course was supported by Anne Lehane, Detective Constable Anne Lehane, that they wanted it to be treated as non-suspicious and would only look at it like that.
And next week, we're going to explore the prevalence of other Australian hidden homicides.
I think the toll is significantly higher, and I think it's because we just have so many deaths across Australia that are not being investigated, especially the suicide, so-called suicide deaths.
And how another family is grappling with the reluctance by authorities to make it right.
He said that Courtney most likely had undiagnosed mental health issues, which was something that her ex-partner had said at the scene. Oh, she's crazy, she's suicidal. She wasn't suicidal. She had a good grip on her life.
If you knew Amy and have information about her death, we'd love to hear from you. Just email us at thetruthaboutamy@7.com.au or visit our website 7news.com.au The Truth About Amy. You can also send us an anonymous tip at www.thetruthaboutamy.com. Presenter and executive producer, Alison Sandy. Presenter and investigative journalist, Liam Bartlett. Sound design, Mark Wright. Assistant producer, Cassie Woodward. Vodcast editor, Carmen Bensley. Graphic artist, Jason Blandford. And special thanks to Brian Seymour and Jessica Evanson. This is a 7 News production.